An angry few, or are anti-COVID restrictions riots the symptom of a much deeper malaise? As the Northern Hemisphere hunkers down for a new winter wave of COVID restrictions, the backlash felt everywhere from the Netherlands and Central Europe to the French Caribbean islands of Guadeloupe and Martinique. Yes, there are fringe conspiracy theorists and muscle men who fancy a punch-up, but there are also those who've lost trust in authorities, what they perceive as heavy-handed ways and mixed messages. Is a generation of leaders who employ anything-goes unfiltered rhetoric to get elected, reaping what it's sown. Meanwhile, there is a majority that's taken its jabs and wants its life back. What to do about it? And how about making good on that promise to vaccinate the rest of the planet before the next mutation comes back to haunt us all? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the violent reaction to new COVID measures we've seen over the past week. And joining us, sociologist Ettore Recchi of the French Political Science Institute Sciences Po's Observatory of Social Change. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Also joining us, commentator and political consultant Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet. How are you?
Fine, thank you, François.
From Rotterdam, political scientist Laurent Chambon is with us. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
And from Vienna, Simon Rippin, associate professor of philosophy at Central European University. Welcome to the show.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation, and you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Let's begin, if you will, by wishing the French Prime Minister a speedy recovery. Jean Castex contracting COVID from his 11-year-old daughter, but not before his Monday visit to Brussels. As a result, Belgium's Prime Minister, Alexander De Croo, forced to self-isolate, along with key cabinet members on both sides of the problem. Now, the problem with public figures is they don't always set the best example. Here you see the two PMs masked up when they greet the press on Monday. But then, okay, when the briefing ends, watch. Where's the masks this time around? Ettore, is that an example of the mixed messages we're talking about here?
Well, we cannot blame him for that. Non-pharmaceutical interventions work, and we know that masks work, and elites should take the lead and send good messages in practice, not only in speeches. But still, this is a minor thing.
Just to remind us of who he is, Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet, the Prime Minister was the president's man in charge of COVID before he got his big promotion. And Jean Castex has been a contact case a bunch of times. Your thoughts when you about this? Again, it's that question of, are politicians setting the right example?
Exactly. And first of all, we don't know whether he got the virus from his daughter or from the numerous people that he spoke to the days before, because, as you know, there was a major political meeting from people coming from all the corners of France a few days before, and they didn't wear any mask or any protection of any kind. So we don't know where it came from, the virus. And also, he might have contaminated other people. And obviously, we have been knowing that for quite some time now, I would say more than a year. And it's astounding that precautions were not taken. And it's not a minor thing, because he's the head of state, at least one of our two heads of state, is in charge of a major crisis in Guadeloupe, as you mentioned earlier. So it's unthinkable. They should set an example also, because we have a state to supervise and we need rules. We need them to take the precautions also, because we need them in charge in that time of crisis.
Laurent Chambon, your thoughts?
About France or about Holland?
Just about our leaders and the messages they're sending in these.
Well, if you see what's going on in Holland, it's very much comparable with the Netherlands, where the Prime Minister is very unclear about what is to be expected and what is coming. And it looks like they really lost their game. They're supposed to be in charge, but clearly on both sides, actually, they're really running after the facts. It's quite embarrassing, actually.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that for a moment. Weekend protests turned ugly in several countries, including where you are in the Netherlands. 4 nights of violence in protest against tighter COVID restrictions that have resulted in more than 150 arrests and 4 wounded by gunshots as police opened fire to defend themselves, say authorities. Laurent, were you surprised at how violent it got, particularly in Rotterdam?
It's quite surprising because usually Holland is quite peaceful. General Dutch people are not very much obsessed with violence. There have been riots before, but now suddenly it really exploded. What is quite interesting is that the message was about people not being vaccinated, maybe being excluded from some places, and they're a small minority actually. They're 15%. And they have the whole country as hostage. And actually, everyone was a bit relieved when the prime minister said it might come that people without vaccine would be a bit set aside. And suddenly, it was this explosion of violence. What's interesting is it's really, really controlled by extreme right. And at the same time, it's mostly working classes in Rotterdam and around, and a lot of Moroccans. That's why it's the big minority here. And that's funny that they were incited by extreme right, and sometimes extreme right said, "Look, Moroccans again." So it's a very complex situation, and it's I have to say it's quite surprising.
What is it? People distrustful of authority?
Or there's a long distrust. We have a prime minister that's been half on power, not doing much the last 10 years. Now he has the whole country as hostage. Because we're waiting now for 6 months for him to form a government that is still not coming. And at the same time, it's been shown, especially in Rotterdam, that minorities, ethnic minorities, but also poor people, were set aside and discriminated against almost on a structural way. So they're very, very upset. Of course, it has nothing to do with vaccine. But you see that the distrust against the government and against Rutte in particular is really high.
We're also hearing, and I'll put it to you, Simon Rippon. We've heard during the weekend protests people employing different language. Some saying we're not for the violence, but we don't want the government to give us orders, and that is something that's always existed. But it seems like it's more the case than before.
That's an interesting question. There's certainly a lot of anger. I saw it at the protests in Vienna this weekend. There's a lot of rejection of authority and all the coronavirus measures, not just the vaccines and the lockdowns, but masks as well. Is it more than before? What can I say? Vaccine mandates are not a new thing. Some of the protests in Vienna were generated by reaction to the announcement that there would be a vaccine mandate from next February, but we've had vaccine mandates for decades, so this is nothing new. So in that sense, it does seem like more than before.
Is it because, well, the pandemic has made us all armchair virologists?
So that's that's an important point. Look, I believe in skepticism as a philosopher. That's a tool of the trade. Questioning received wisdom helps us to find out our errors. It helps us to understand better the reasons for believing the things we do. It helps us to reject received wisdom when it's mistaken. But in a functioning democracy, we also have to respect experts in their respective areas of expertise, and most people, most of the time, are willing to do that. So people call plumbers when they want to get the pipes fixed. They call electricians when they want to get the wiring fixed. They want pilots to fly their planes. So there's something a bit strange going on with the rejection of medical authority when it comes to news about the coronavirus and about vaccines.
Tori Recchi?
Well, I will look at the bigger picture. And to me, this is just a pretext, an occasion for a malaise that's been with us over the last decades. There are sectors of Western, industrialized, developed societies that have been left behind. We know this. We have the losers of globalization. Over the last 30 years, the world has globalized. There has been economic growth mostly all over the place. Some people have gained. Some people, only a few people have lost. But these people are concentrated in the lower middle classes of industrialized advanced economies. And these are the people who form the majority of the yellow vests, and there are people that are taking to the streets right now. So the vaccine is just another excuse, if you want, or occasion to express an anger and a resentment that is latent in these sectors of society.
But here, this is the interesting point. We're talking about mortal danger, less spectacular than the images we've been showing of Rotterdam, but as dramatic is news the Netherlands this Tuesday has started transporting COVID-19 patients across its border to Germany, this to ease pressure on overwhelmed Dutch hospitals. Germany, where authorities are also sounding the alarm ahead of Christmas.
Wahrscheinlich wird am Ende dieses Winters so ziemlich jeder in Deutschland, das wurde ja manchmal schon etwas zynisch genannt, geimpft, genesen oder gestorben sein. Aber es ist tatsächlich ja so. Mit der sehr ansteckenden Delta-Variante ist das sehr, sehr wahrscheinlich.
Yeah, so basically trying to, I mean, this is very blunt language, but how's that being received by the people that you describe who feel disenfranchised?
I'm not surprised that the Netherlands is taking the lead of protest. And you know why? Because if you take a score of individualism that is based on a representative sample of the population of hundreds of society, the Netherlands is the most individualized or most individualistic society in continental Europe. Individualism means the world stops at my step door or doorstep. And this kind of mixture with structural relative deprivation and individualism explodes and makes people really uncomfortable.
Laurent Chambon, this individualism, which I guess dates back to the 17th century and even further in the Netherlands, we heard it expressed on Monday. We heard from Dutch people who said to us, look, we're not for the violence either. We don't associate ourselves with those who riot, but we don't like being told what to do. Is there something now in the 21st century that makes it easier to, how should I say this, have that individualist fiber in you when you have social media where you can broadcast how you feel as an individual?
There are many things. First is Dutch society has been for a long time very individualistic, because already when the Americans came after the Second World War, they had warnings, be careful, Dutch people are against authority. So it's not new at all. It's been getting worse, and I think also the Corona crisis has made that people the last year and a half have been really become even more selfish. You see that young people are so used to being alone that they decide anytime what they want to do, and they don't accept any authority, even less than they were 2 years ago. But you have to understand also that we're in the middle of a political crisis. So there is this individualism that is extreme, but also the fact that most traditional parties and whatever structures the Dutch society have disappeared. The church has completely disappeared. The unions are completely gone. Most of the institutions are gone. And politics is really in shambles, with extreme right getting more or less a quarter of the votes. And even the extreme rights are fighting with each other. Now we have 4 parties in extreme right. So what you see is this conjunction of a virus, of poverty and exclusion in Rotterdam especially, but also this political chaos that, and nobody seems to be able to structure people's anger.
But but again, Laurent, there's a mortal danger here. I mean, the hospitals are swamped.
Yes. Oh, there's no discussion. Everyone is afraid, but nobody dares to say anything. And in shops, people are supposed to wear a mask. And whenever you dare ask someone to wear a mask, people are so aggressive. I've never seen that. It's really a weird situation.
Philippe Chevrolet, I've heard people quip that the French complain a lot, but in the end, they're perhaps a little more obedient. They've gotten their jabs more. They're wearing their masks more. Are the French more obedient than the Dutch?
Yes, I think we have a longer tradition regarding sanitary measures, maybe because we invented the vaccine, so to speak, maybe because we are used to being, organized around our health system very much. Maybe it's more central in our culture than in other cultures, but we are at the same time protesting too, and we are also stricken by this individualism you referred to. And what we are asking people now is going from an individual culture where you decide what is good for you to a collective culture more and more with climate change. And it's a huge cultural shift, and it's normal that there would be resistance, and it's existing there around the COVID. But I think, as one of your guests said, that it could have happened earlier or later on other topics. And obviously we are obedient because we are respecting the lockdown. But what we see now in Guadeloupe, for instance, is backlash, because people have been repressing their anger, their fears for so long.
Yeah, I want to talk about Guadeloupe in a moment, but first, just this issue of the individual first, or the individual at the service of the state. Western Europe's first nation to return to lockdown on Monday was Austria, where the pushback comes from several quarters, including those critical of the messaging in this crisis.
Also ich glaube, man kann nicht einverstanden sein damit, weil wenn man jede Woche immer wieder irgendwelche Regeln ändert und dann verspricht man, für Geimpfte wird kein Lockdown kommen, eine Woche später haben wir einen Lockdown.
Simon Rippon, that contention that every week they change the rules. Your reaction when you hear that?
Well, the measures have certainly changed very quickly a number of times. It's certainly true that's a legitimate complaint. And, some of the response in Austria has not been quite what we might want it to be. I mean, there are a range of measures that can be adopted short of a vaccine mandate. And Austria adopted a number of these, but failed in other respects. They didn't try very strongly to try to incentivize people to get vaccinated. They didn't try, for example, just changing the default policy. So giving people a vaccination appointment and saying, come to this appointment, or cancel it if you don't want it. That kind of thing, changing the default, can really change change people's behavior. And it feels like, and we've rushed quite quickly into now in Austria a full lockdown, and into a vaccine mandate. We wouldn't want things to go this way.
And do you think that there is this, you just heard what Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet said, that we're approaching this point, humanity, where this age we currently bask in, where you can build your persona on Instagram or whatever, that may soon be coming to an end with climate change. We're going to have to think more collectively. Do you get a sense of that?
You mentioned social media earlier. I think that there's a really simple explanation for the main effect of social media on political debate, which is that people who in former times would have been a minority spouting off in the pub and probably being laughed at or giving in to peer pressure, now finds a group of people that agree with them, however extreme the view. So it seems to me that there's quite a simple explanation for how people can develop more and more extreme opinions through social media.
Yeah, which brings us back to what I promised Philippe, which is we would talk about what's going on right now in Guadeloupe and Martinique. The mortality rate is lower in France than it is in other places, and not just on the mainland, though there are protests. Guadeloupe has been in the throes of a general strike since November 15th. Pushback over vaccine mandates for essential workers have morphed with long-standing social demands to address social inequality, as Philippe mentioned. The government's scrambling, in particular, to address the demands of unvaccinated healthcare workers there. They don't trust what's being told by authorities, and they don't trust next-generation RNA vaccines. The Overseas Affairs Minister promising them he'll do something about it.
Déjà, vous avez des soignants qui nous disent « je suis pas contre le vaccin, mais je suis contre l'ARN messager ». Donc ça, on s'est engagé hier soir à peut-être trouver en fonction des âges, en fonction de leur âge.
All right, the minister, they're saying there are people who tell us we're not against vaccines, we're against RNA messenger vaccines. Why are they against these next generation vaccines? And do you agree with the minister there when he says, well, we'll find you other vaccines instead?
It's an attempt to compromise. I'm not a medical doctor, so I cannot enter this kind of technical debate. And in fact, anybody who has not the skills of expertise to discuss this should just step down from the debate. But that's exactly what happens with the echo chambers that Simon was hinting at. People enter social media groups that kind of reverberate potential news that are completely fake, and we know how it ends. So yeah, that's the additional ingredient to the dangerous mixture that I was hinting at before, that is structural deprivation, losing out, globalization, individualism, and then the internet and the social media echo chamber phenomenon.
Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet, your reaction when you hear this negotiation that's begun with, again, we're talking about unvaccinated healthcare workers in Guadeloupe who say we're okay with vaccines, just we don't want, the ones like Pfizer that are next generation messenger RNA vaccines.
Really, we are at the last minute. Stop arguing, stop discussing with these people, just vaccinate them. If you have to make it mandatory, make it mandatory. We won't. This is maddening. This new generation of vaccines, it's a major innovation. It's a major innovation in our medical capabilities. It's outstanding that we were able to create these vaccines and distribute them in this larger scale as we did. It's a major achievement for humanity, for mankind, and we need to stop arguing. Certainly, it's not a good thing to start telling them, well, you may be right. Well, let's take 20 years to manufacture a vaccine the old way, so you get comfortable with that. No. Actually, we have 89% of the population who is vaccinated with these new vaccines. They are fine. They are okay. There have been billions of people vaccinated with these vaccines. They are fine. They are okay. Stop arguing. Let's vaccinate these people. If we have to use force and mandatory things, let's do that. I mean, we are. It's a question of life and death. We won't go into lockdown forever. I mean, we need to leave. If these people don't get that, well, it's bad for them. But at one point, we have to, stop at the stop signs. We have to respect the lights in the street. If the light is red, you have to stop. That's something that our society is made of. We are all unhappy about this, but we need to respect others, and sometimes we need to enforce regulations so that we can, live together.
Simon Rippon, again, you mentioned the healthy skepticism of a philosopher, which is also the healthy skepticism of a scientist. In this case, you heard Philippe say it's an unhealthy skepticism in this case because it could cost lots of lives. Your thoughts on the fact that science is being questioned?
Science is open to question. Science is being open to question, but skepticism has to be disciplined. And one thing that skeptics have to do is respect legitimate authorities. So when we've got scientifically well-established findings, supported by and endorsed by the vast majority of experts who have the relevant credentials, we're really not in a place to question that. These are obviously complex matters, how viruses work, how vaccines work, whether they're safe. These are very complex scientific matters. People obviously get credentialed in this and have to study for many years to do so. And we have to respect that authority. we can ask questions and we can expect answers to questions, but that's not the same thing as rejecting the findings.
The fact that they brought a vaccine to market within 1 year, that's an incredible speed. Is it going too fast for many people?
I couldn't really comment on that. I mean, it's an incredible achievement to get the vaccines out in a year. They were safety tested. Now they've been safety tested, as much as almost any medical procedure ever, because there've been, billions of people have now been vaccinated. Some people definitely can point to the potential for long-term effects that we don't know about yet, or to side effects that happen in a very tiny minority of cases. But when they do this, they always overlook the long-term effects of contracting COVID and the known side effects of contracting COVID, which are very, very serious.
All right, there are those who don't want their jabs and those who are crying out for them. A panel co-chaired by former New Zealand Prime Minister Helen Clark and former Liberian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf says COVID could last at least an extra year because of failure to agree on a global strategy to make vaccines available for the developing world.
And this is a comprehensive global failure. There's been an inadequate, in my view, I'm speaking for myself, I should say, an inadequate collective global leadership response, especially around aspects of system reform and financial mobilization.
Laurent Chambon, your thoughts, because again, it's back to that question of how we think collectively. We won't lick the pandemic unless the whole world can solve the problem.
Yes, if you look at Holland, what people don't know is there's a very strong Christian community. They live what we call in the Bible Belt. It's a belt around Rotterdam, Amsterdam, where they're heavily Christian. They're actually like the Christian Talibans, if you want. None of them want to get vaccines. It's not only for COVID, but a lot of other things. And if you know the history of Holland, there's the place where religions have the most freedom. And I don't think this will be changed because it's really the essence of the country. And it looks like the answer won't have to be scientific or even reasonable, but it will have to be political. The only answer in the case of Holland will be to involve the Christian leaders so that they will hopefully take their community into getting vaccinated. I think if you look at the rest of the world and Guadeloupe, but not only, also lots of countries, the only answer will be a political, cultural answer and not a scientific answer. On the scientific answer, we know it. People should be vaccinated. But the question is really about community. And when you see how Christians are really resisting the vaccination, it gives us an idea of how it can happen in other places. So on that case, I think Holland is interesting because it tells you how people might really be against vaccination in a hysteric way, and that the solution is definitely not the police, but politics.
Politics, but how do you, at the same time, again, we're talking about the skeptics here who have the vaccine available, while at the same time, the rest of the planet doesn't have the vaccine in a lot of places, and they want it. So how do you get the world's attention? There's going to be a big meeting of health ministers at the World Health Organization next week. How do you get them to speed up the process? They made all these pledges, remember, at the G20 summit.
Well, it's COVID-19, but it's also pollution. It's also global warming. It's also war and hunger. So, if I had a solution, I would be prime minister. And I don't think most people have the answer. And I'm sorry, I'm a bit negative, but since they haven't solved the other problems, I don't see how they will manage to solve this problem.
Ettore Recchi?
Well, this is a major scandal, and it shows that we lack, even at the EU level, something that the EU could have done. Was quite good at managing a relatively fair distribution of vaccines across the EU. But if EU wants to play a major global role, it should take the lead on distributing vaccines to less developed countries.
And lifting intellectual property rights on.
Exactly.
Is there you heard the pessimism of Laurent Chambon, because whether it's again addressing global warming or addressing this pandemic, it means a little bit of sacrifice on this end, and yet we don't see it coming. Can people change their mindset and think collectively?
I'm not the biggest expert on this, but I think there has been some sort of a communication problem in presenting the vaccine. The vaccines are a right for people, but also a duty. It's a civic responsibility to get vaccine, to shelter others, and to like tax paying. And this was rather sold like, well, you're entitled to your vaccine to protect your own health. There is more than that, and it should be put on the table. So maybe even the idea of a vaccine mandate should be something that the EU could engage with directly.
So your native Italy, it's like France in that we know there's elections coming up next year.
23.
2023.
One never knows in Italy, but still.
The smart thinking is that perhaps when the new budget's in, that this current unity government we may have a snap election in any case.
Francois, you never know in Italy, and then there is the election of a president of the republic that complicates the game.
Italy, which was hardest hit at the outset of the COVID pandemic, Italians who went and got their jobs afterwards. Right now, when you look at what's going on in the Netherlands, when you look at what's going on in France, what does Italy look like more?
Italy was quite surprisingly at the forefront of introducing what has been called in Italy the Green Pass, that is a mandate to show either vaccine or test to go to your workplace, and it worked. Actually, it was very effective in reducing the spread of the virus, and the pandemic was tamed, maybe even better than in France at some point. The vaccination rate is it's not the highest in Europe, to the best of my knowledge. I think the highest is in Spain. There's more than 75% of the population. So eventually, the government was quite daring, and it worked.
Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet, let me ask you, because when you look ahead now to next April's presidential election in this country, some say the violence we've been seeing since before the Yellow Vests movement is also in part to do with those left behind, as Ettore was saying, but also to do with the heated rhetoric we're hearing from politicians themselves, and we're hearing violent words from those running for president. Are we expecting that the winning ticket for a candidate in 2022 is to employ very strong language or very reassuring language?
Well, that's all the question. We don't know. There is some speculation about it. Either the winner of this election is someone who could be negative and could be openly, blatantly, violent in his words, at least, or in other words, or he will be a moderate, kind of a father-like figure. And Emmanuel Macron clearly is trying to play the father-like figure card, sometimes playing with, aggressive language, borderline positions, but it's only something you play with. Semantics. It's not his central card. Semantics, exactly. And we see Eric Zemmour and Marine Le Pen going very, openly violent against, immigration, for instance. And the fact is that the language in our political class is more and more violent. We are getting more and more used to it, even to the point that we don't even notice when a political leader on the central right is saying that we should end immigration as it is. And we don't even react against that. A few years ago, it would have been considered as something really overly aggressive, stupid, and something that we couldn't hear. really. But nowadays we tolerate that and we live with that. And, each time there is a step up in aggressivity and violence, and we don't see the end of it. And yet, certainly the Yellow Vest movement has been supported by like 60% of the population, even when this movement got violent in the streets. So there is a movement in France towards aggressiveness and violence, and we don't see the end of it. If Macron is re-elected, we will be able to consider that this was only a phase. Maybe it could happen again, but it was a phase. If he fails, we don't really know what will be the next step.
Simon Rippon, the increase in vitriol in political rhetoric, is that something you think about?
Sure. Look, I think people in the end can be convinced by arguments by and large. And sometimes the media just doesn't take the time, and the leaders don't take the time to explain the arguments to people. So we've got people here making choices which impose physical risks on others. They don't want to accept measures which they feel are imposed on them. And consent and autonomy is a big deal. I'm a liberal. I think the government shouldn't tell us how to live our lives. I want it to defend our freedoms, but restrictions on freedoms are necessary at the point where you impose physical risks on others. Just like we have to have driving licenses, and we can't smoke at work or in schools or hospitals, or carry guns around, even if we feel safer with them. We have to look at the scientific facts, and the government has to take measures to restrict the freedom of some to stop them imposing risks on others. I think people haven't heard enough of that argument. Actually, it's not often clearly presented that we actually favor consent, we favor autonomy, we favor freedom, but only up to a limit where your behavior imposes very significant risks on other people.
And I know that there's a lot of political turmoil right now where you are in Austria. The previous chancellor resigning in political scandal. Is it ripe for more reassuring rhetoric, or is it just going to get worse?
I got to put my hands up and say I have no idea.
Okay. Laurent Chambon, a final word, because as you say, Dutch politics in suspended animation. You have a prime minister who's been there a long time and who might still be there for a little while longer. Again, it's this idea of what you heard from Simon, that you can argue the point with people and you can make a convincing argument. You agree with that?
Yeah, the problem is in the case of Holland is really that it's been a long time since people agreed. We used to say that 2 Dutch people make a religion and 3 people make a schism. There's two churches. Suddenly, it's really about that. As soon as people agree together, people feel obliged to disagree. It's really, I'm a French person. It feels like a disease sometimes. I'm like, come on, you don't need to have an opinion on everything. But it's always like that. That said, there's often a moment in Dutch politics where the opinion really changes suddenly, and suddenly the majority starts to take over. And now lately, you see that lots of people are irritated with a few people, like more or less 15%, who are taking the whole country in a stage. So I believe that it might be possible to some point with social control that opinion changes in Holland. But lately, I have to say I'm quite pessimistic on Dutch politics, and I'm not the only one.
All right. Well, unfortunately, going to leave it on a pessimistic note because we're out of time. Laurent Chambon, I want to thank you so much, though, for joining us from Rotterdam. Simon Rippon in Vienna, I want to thank as well. Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet and Ettore Recchi for being with us. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.